Hello and welcome to episode 5 of Three OG Coaches Talking Shop. I've got Leanne and Sass here with me. Hello,
Hey.
hello. And today we are going to talk about overcoming the discomfort of putting yourself out there. And so I'm going to kick off with a few thoughts and then we'll see where the conversation goes. As always, where we end up, nobody knows. So what this topic made me think of is, first, the thing that I do with my coaching clients out of the gate, coaching clients, is to validate that putting ourselves out there in this way, and I'm not even talking about social media posts or writing. I mean, we will talk about that, but I am talking about the energy of putting yourself out there, of talking about yourself, of saying, hey, I'm somebody that you can come to and hire for this service, right? However you do that, and we'll talk about all that, is incredibly vulnerable. It's different than having a job. It's different than helping somebody else put themselves out there in the
Mhm.
world. And so the first thing that I want to say is, if you're feeling tender about this, it's because it's vulnerable. And I don't know that that goes away. I think you get more comfortable, but then there's always some place where that vulnerability will hit. So I guess the first thing that I wanted to say is, if you're feeling vulnerable, because I think a lot of people see there's a ton of comparison that goes on, right? So if you're seeing somebody out there who seems to be really comfortable putting themselves out there, and you're sort of benchmarking yourself to them and finding yourself lacking, and it's like, that's never going to do you any good. And um, yeah, so the first thing I just wanted to validate, it's an incredibly vulnerable thing to put yourself out there in the world as a practitioner. And the other thing that I was thinking about, so it's like, what is the way forward? And I know one of the biggest things for me as a coach is when I removed some of the pressure from myself and adopted an experimental mindset. And so what that looked like when I was a newer coach, and I may have even talked about this on here before, I put a ton of pressure on myself to make money out of the gate. We've talked about this. And what happened, first of all, financially, that was not great, but also it really put a lot of pressure on my coaching, because I had to deliver for people so that
Mm.
they could pay me money so I could keep doing this. And it became almost transactional in a way. There was no room for me to be a learner. I had to be an expert out of the gate. And so that, that created a lot of difficulty for me in putting myself out there with my clients, because I didn't give myself permission to not know. I didn't even give myself permission to have those pauses. We're in the coaching conversation and your client shares something, or something comes up, and you don't even really know what to do next, or you don't know. You're just there. And now it's no problem for me to just be there. I don't need to know where this is going. I don't need to have the next thing to say. And now, because I don't put that pressure on myself, I can just wait to see, you know, what comes up for them. What's the next thought that they're going to have? So, and then just in business, when I stopped living and dying by every launch and instead looked at everything I did as an experiment where I could get more information, that also helped me put myself out there. Um, and then the other thing that I think about a lot is that this is why, for all the reasons I just stated, why it's so important to find your way and not think you have to follow the way. Not just because, hey, you can do it your way and that's a way to talk about it, but because literally it will be incredibly difficult for you to succeed in a sustainable way until you find your way. And there are so many ways. That's the beauty. And so I'll kick it off. I'll kick it out to you guys at this point and see what comes up for you.
Well, lots. I've got, so I'm going to start with your first. I want to just add a little bit to what you said about feeling vulnerable. I want to really like flesh that out a little bit with how natural that is, how natural it is for us to feel strange putting ourselves in front of strangers. So I remember, I'm going to start with a little story. I remember when I started teaching the early years of teaching, I taught up in northern British Columbia in a place that had a very high First Nations population. And I was teaching humanities to, teenagers, and I wanted them to do speeches. One of the things that we did was like, oh, we're going to work on public speaking, and we're going to do, you're going to write a little speech about something. You're going to get up in front of the class, and you're going to share this speech. And at one point, there was a liaison, a First Nations liaison person who worked for the school district, and they pulled me aside and they said, "You have to understand that these First Nations kids in your class have, like, a lot of them they flew into the place that I was teaching from small little villages around the North Coast, Hartley Bay, Port Simpson, these beautiful little villages. And they knew everybody in the village and everybody knew them. And that's the natural experience of the human psyche for most of our history. That was our experience. That's what our psyche has actually grown up with. We live in a small village and everybody knows us and we know everybody. And so this First Nations liaison said to me, like, for these kids to get up in front of a class full of kids that they don't know, that they have just come to this, it was a small town, but it was for them a big place. And to be in this class with all these kids that they might have known a couple of them, but they didn't know most of them. That was very strange experience for them. And so I like to remember that as like, this is our natural human experience. And we are going against, you know,
Yes.
centuries and millennia of our human experience when we put ourselves in front of strangers. So I just wanted to sort of add that piece to it, that it's a really natural and healthy response, I think. It's not some pathology. It's not like, what's wrong with me that I can't put myself out there like other people
Mm.
can or whatever. Like, no, it's a
Yeah.
healthy feeling.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I just wanted to put a little tweak on that because I think that's so important that there's nothing wrong with this response, right? And then making yourself wrong for it is just like a whole other level of crap that you have to navigate. And of course we do that, but it's like when you can just start to know, oh, it's natural to be nervous to be up in front of strangers, and that comes down through the DNA. And we think that we need to ramp up the pressure, like what's wrong with me that I can't do this? And
Mhm.
actually the way through is like, what's right with me that
Yeah.
I'm responding this way? And then from that, how do I move out of my comfort zone and move into a new
Yeah.
space, knowing that this is, I'm going against something that maybe is deep inside of me, that is
Yeah.
deep
How do I
inside of
have a
me.
relationship with it?
Yes.
Instead of, yeah. And this goes back to like our very first chat about coachfluencers, where that we are very much given this impression that we should be able to do that. We should be able to be totally ex expose ourselves almost, right? And that's the norm and we should do that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for
I'd
that.
also add, alongside that kind of wider piece around, how we've evolved, what's natural. It was only, I think about my grandmothers. They would never have had a venue where anyone thought they had anything useful to say, let alone an audience, right? Like it's very new for us, particularly as women, to have a place where we can say what we believe, stand for
Mm.
something, share our
Mm.
preferences. And because of that, most of us, well, maybe I'm biased because I work pretty much solely with folks who experience a lot of self-doubt. But I think for many of us, we've grown up in homes where we didn't have a template to share what we thought, or that our opinions were welcome, right? That people cared about what we had to say. And I always say, if you grew up in a home where you were cherished by at least one person, that's the lottery win, I think.
Yeah.
That's the absolute lottery win. If you didn't grow up in that kind of environment, we often have to do that work as grown-ups, to kind of go back and take care of ourselves in those circumstances. So it takes an enormous amount of courage, I think, to be willing to even experiment in that discomfort, to say, well, actually, I really care about this work, and I really want to reach out to people and say, hey, I made this thing. Do you want to come and play with me? Like, I think that takes an enormous amount of courage when there are personal stories and cultural narratives that basically want us all to shut up, or just have not given us the space to be able to say something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny because we're sort of unpacking like, oh, all the reasons why it's hard, but I think it's worth doing so that we can come around to how to make it less hard. And so one more thing that can make it hard is so that we're sort of talking about putting yourself out there on the like marketing or getting to know people level, but then there's sitting with a client and like what happens when your client is like intimidating, or you think, oh my gosh, why is this person hiring me? And so there's that piece of the vulnerability too, of just saying, you know what, I'm just going to show up and be in service to this person and kind of set that aside. So, we've cataloged a lot of the reasons why it feels vulnerable. And I think it's important to validate that, like, you're not alone. And guess what? That doesn't go away. Like, I'm really comfortable showing up with clients, but sometimes there's people that show up and I have like a little moment of like, wow, look at what this person's done in their life or whatever. And or I'm doing something new in marketing or doing a podcast or whatever. There's always sort of a new edge of vulnerability. So it doesn't go away. I think the ticket is, like you two are talking about, is learning how to work with it and work with yourself. And so what have you two found that works? Like, what are your go-to moves for overcoming that?
Well, I think this is going to sound like a bit of a repeat of what I've said in or what we've talked about in other chats. But I think stopping being so self-conscious, and I don't mean that like, I mean, realize, like Sass says, we might have doubts about ourselves, or we might feel vulnerable or whatever, but the work, or like you said, Bridgette, if we doubt the power of what we're doing, that's where I think the trouble comes. Because I don't try and believe in myself. I don't try and like, okay, I'm going to be confident or whatever. I just go like, okay, I know this shit works. I can trust it. And so even though I'm feeling a little shaky, I'm just like, all right, I know I'm along for the ride. Like, and once I can get out of my own way that way and just like let my confidence in the coaching happen. Or at one time I remember I was coaching a client on giving a talk, and I remember like she could not stop thinking about herself. And it was only when we were able to say, I said, like, but what about all those people out there who want to hear what you have to say? Like, have you thought about them? Are you thinking about them at all? Or are you only thinking about yourself? Like, I almost had to be a little bit sharp you know, with that kind of like, stop thinking about yourself so goddamn much, you know, and it was kind of like a little bit of a switch for her. And she kind of went like, oh gosh, yeah, like it was, and that helps, I think, for me. And I think that helps for some of my clients too.
Yeah.
I think that's
This
such
is
a great,
Yeah, I love that.
oh, go
I want to
ahead.
hear what, I'm anxious to hear what Sass says, because this is
Mm.
totally her forte.
Yeah, I love this conversation so much. And I love that provocation. Like, are you even thinking of your clients at all? Like, I genuinely think that can be really helpful. Like, for us to go, oh, actually, it's not really about me. Like, I can put this down. You know, I can pour my energy and my attention into the other person, into the audience, into the, you know, what are they looking for? You know, that can be so helpful just to get, because we can disappear up our own asses, right? Like worrying about ourselves sometimes. And I kind of adore that side of me, but I have to sometimes be like, come on, right? Like, that's enough now. Let's focus on the people. I think that the one thing I would say is that most of us, like generally speaking, I think most of us know what to do. You know, we kind of know, oh, I need to give this talk in the context of your client, Leanne, and you know, I need to market my business, or I need to be present with a client. I need, you know, all of that stuff. We kind of know what to do. I think the trickier stuff can come in when we're not sure why we're not doing that, and we're not sure what to do instead. Like, I think that can often be the block. And I would say one of the questions I ask clients all the time is, if you're holding yourself back from being more visible or from sharing your voice in a session in your business, just contemplate, like, what are you protecting yourself from? What's the thing you're worried about is going to happen? Because I think that's what self-doubt really is. It's a self-protection mechanism. There's a lot of, frankly, bullshit out there in the world, and it's based on a lot of outdated research and a lot of unhelpful approaches, that self-doubt is somehow some kind of sabotage that we commit on ourselves. And
Yeah.
I've never found that to be true. I think it's actually the part of us that is sometimes quite hurt or fearful, that has learned that through some formative experiences that it's not safe for me to do XYZ. And so we take care of ourselves in the best way we know how. When that is at a time when we're quite young or we feel quite under-resourced, then we'll often hold back rather than risk, you know, rejection, judgment, criticism, whatever we think is going to happen. So it's really worth your time and energy to look at, like, why are you protecting yourself? Like, what are you protecting yourself from? And that often will give you some clues as to how you can experiment with trying new ways, right? So I know for me, my biggest risk is disappointment. I never want to disappoint people. And that has got me down some really, really windy paths, you know, where I'm working really hard. So, and I'm constantly checking, are you disappointed? Are you good? Are we good? Are you good? Like, it brings out my people pleaser, like my overworker, all of that stuff. And it's all this massive Olympic sized effort to never disappoint anyone, because I grew up in a home where I constantly felt like I really wasn't kind of making the cut. You know, I was disappointing in some way. And I just went round and round that loop a few thousand times, and that became an aspect of my identity. And, you know, having spent the last kind of dozen years unhooking myself from that, I had so much compassion for little Sass trying so damn hard, right? And so I would say, whatever you are protecting yourself from, the healthiest response, in my opinion, is to be in relationship with that thing. Because what you really are then is you're in relationship with an aspect of yourself that needs some care and compassion.
Yeah. I'm seeing by the violent nodding in agreement. And I was just thinking as you were talking, Sass, when you talk about putting yourself out there, I think right away you're getting into kind of parts work or inner child work, or however you want to think about it. But it really is, you know, the approach is not calling yourself names, shouting yourself down. Oh, I'm a procrastinator. Oh, I'm a people, whatever, all these things because if you just say I'm a procrastinator, there's no more conversation. Well, I'm just a procrastinator. That's it. There's nothing to be learned. There's no forward movement. And so, Sass, what I hear you saying is like, get curious. And this is an opportunity to find out. And you will find that one thing we say in our house all the time is we come by it naturally. Like you come by your fears very naturally. It's not a surprise. It's not out of the blue. It's not because you're a procrastinator. I 100% agree that this is like some kind of self-sabotage. It is not. It's the ultimate self-protection. And so you have to start to see it what it is for what it is. And then the solution is not beating up on yourself, being mean to yourself, applying more pressure, all those things we've been taught by culture. It's love. It is meeting yourself with love and cultivating your inner loving adult that has a dialogue with that part of you. And however you want to do that, you can do it any way, but it's like, how are we going to find this way through? And like you said, that's how the experiments work. That's what starts to give you the ideas. And that's what I was talking about that's how you begin to find your way. So I loved what you were saying there.
Yeah. And I want to just add though, because I feel like there's a little piece here that I just want to add this little piece of nuance that because as I've said before, I'm more private person, right? And I honor that. And I don't think to myself, oh, what's wrong with you that you don't want to share more of your, this or that. And that's okay too. Like you don't have to.
Yes.
You don't have to, you get to honor your own comfort with sharing. And like that's why, like even me doing this with you guys, it's like this is fine for me because I love talking about ideas. I love sharing ideas and stuff. But I'm not interested in, sort of telling you what I'm cooking tonight for dinner or whatever it is. Like I just I don't know. I'm just trying to think of a random example, but and that is totally okay too. Like we get to be, we get to honor. So, and this is a little piece of actually, so I wanted to say, like you said, we come by it naturally. You said that a few times, Bridgette, and I'm like, yes, I know what you mean by that. And I would say it's almost, we come by it, but it's kind of almost, it takes us against our nature. Our nature actually is to be more, because we're supposed to have been taken care of. We're supposed to have been the apple of someone's eye. We're supposed to have been, those are the conditions that should have been there. And for them not to be there, and for us then to have these tender spots is a little bit weird. It's a little bit against what nature intended. So that's another little nuance I wanted to add there.
Yeah.
I love that you're saying that, because I will often work with folks where their self-doubt is actually about overworking and being very visible, oversharing, and almost going into the kind of overexpression, right, of that. And for me, it's like I'm really fascinated by kind of what I call our growth edges, right? Like for someone like that, actually to cultivate a sense of privacy could be a growth edge, right? And it's like you kind of already know what happens when you do this, right? When you're really out there and extroverting all the time, and that if at any point that starts to feel unsatisfying or super vulnerable in a way that you don't enjoy, or it culls you in some way, it's like, well, maybe that's calling for something different. Maybe you are at an edge. You already know what this is like, what happens when you experiment with something new. And I think the coaching world is often about being bigger, better, more, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I think all we're doing is kind of teaching our clients how to succeed in what is actually a really screwed up world, right? So because that's what the world requires of us. And I'm more interested in looking at, for each of us individually, where are our growth edges? And when it comes to something like visibility or sharing your preferences, taking a stand for something, there can be an under expression and an over expression of that creates the same sense of discomfort and, oh, I don't know if I want to do it like this anymore. And that's where, for anyone, you can play with that edge, and it may be about going in different directions.
Yeah, I call that promiscuous vulnerability, when
I
somebody's
love that.
so out there, because we see it, like, I have a lot of roots in child's development and attachment, and so when we look at it through that lens, we see that kids are naturally meant to be shy, for example, right? Like, kind of hang on to their parent's leg and peek out at the. But then you come across children where there hasn't been a good, strong primary attachment, and they are very promiscuous in pursuing an attachment, right? They will go sit on anybody's lap. They will go, like, they're kind of like, are you my mother? Are you my, that story? Are you my mother? Are you my mother? Are you my mother? They're looking for that attachment. And so they can seem like just bubbly, extroverted kids, but they're
And they're often
actually
praised for that.
Yes, yeah, because but they're really that. So that's kind of what you're talking about, is kind of that people who over pursue vulnerability or exposing themselves because they're so hungry to be, praised or connect, have someone validated. Yeah, all of those things. So yes, that's a great example, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. As you both were talking, I was thinking about how easy it is for coaches to pick up what they think they should be doing, because that's how you make it as a coach, right? So it's like, you have to post to Instagram every day. And not only do you have to post, but you have to do a reel that's a video, and you have to have the right lighting and all that.
Yeah.
You have to dance.
You have to dance and, or take a selfie with every post because the algorithm likes that, or even write content or do it, in whatever way. And when I start to see people start gaining traction is when they do exactly what we're talking about here. So the first question is like, who am I? What do I like? Am I a really private person and I don't really want to be on social media at all? Do I like being on, like, for me, I love having the conversations and I've loved social media, but there's nuances in that. I don't like doing videos where I'm just talking to camera. I do them sometimes, but it's not my favorite. Like, that's why I love this conversation. And so, but I've fallen into that, like, oh, I got to do reels now because and I don't really love Instagram for me personally, posting my work there. And it's like such a personal thing. And so I think what's really fun and creative is when you take all that in, but then you run it up against your own filter of who are you and what do you like? And that's where you may have to experiment and find that out. Or instead of like, oh, I want to do a podcast, well, what are the conditions of doing a podcast under which I might thrive? And that's assuming that you even like question that basic assumption first. But I think what turned us all on about this is the division of labor is amazing. And it keeps me from like overthinking things, and then just getting on and having the conversation and then sharing the responsibility. Like, that's so rich and good. And so that's where I think people are missing the fun of putting yourself out there when you start to look at how you want to do it and what works for you. Some people want to be out in their community. Some people do it through connecting through their clubs and their interests and the classes that they're taking. And it's all legitimate. So I just see
Mhm.
so many people struggling. And I think there's this sort of catch-all idea of putting yourself out there. You know,
Mhm.
my partner's business is all through referrals and word of mouth. You know,
Mm.
there's no
Yeah.
outward facing mechanism for that. So there's so many ways
I think
to do this, and we
that's
only see
the
the loudest voices.
yeah, yeah. Well, and what I will say to business owners who are like, oh my goodness, yes, if it was up to me, it would just be referrals and I would never be on social media. And I'm like, cool. Now we're going to solve the right problem, right? Because it's still
Yes.
a challenge, right? It's still a challenge. Okay, so now we've got a different set of challenges here. How are we going to follow up? How do we get the referrals? What do we need to be doing? That might create some discomfort as well. Like this, there isn't usually, I found anyway, with any of these challenges, there isn't like a nice, neat solution where you never have to feel any discomfort at all.
Oh yeah.
But I
No.
think what you're saying, Bridgette, for me is like the key. It's like really go into what fits you, what feels good to you, because that's going to be sustainable and it's going to help you, yeah, like I said, solve the right problem rather than be constantly challenging yourself to do something you hate doing. Like, that's not the
Yeah.
energy that any of us, I think, want to be putting out there.
Yeah. Yeah, we
Yeah.
need to be in the zone of optimal discomfort, as the
Yes.
psychologists
Ooh.
call it, right? Where it's like, if there's no discomfort, then there's no, like, doing
No
this
growth.
at the beginning is a little bit like "Ugh," for me, because I am like, oh, so I'm gonna like, like, and I like, last time we talked, I'm like, does my nose look huge? And then I was watching a little clip Bridgette did, and I was like, look at this gap between my lower teeth. And like, I'm just feeling like all kinds of like self-consciousness, whatever, just human
Yeah.
stuff. But so there is, it's getting, every time we do it, it's getting easier and easier, and I'm feeling like more and more comfortable. But there has to be that optimal discomfort in the beginning, or nothing's happening. So the zone of
Mm.
optimal
Mm.
discomfort is where you feel a little bit of like crunchiness, a little bit of anxiety, but you're not like losing sleep over it, or you're not like,
Yeah.
it's kind of a little exciting anxiousness, right? There's
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
and that's good.
Yeah.
And we want to feel that 100%. Like, this is not about never feeling any discomfort, because
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
yeah, no. But it's
Yeah.
about
I
finding that
can't
sweet
remember who.
spot.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I really love that optimal discomfort. I'm gonna borrow that. May forget to credit you.
Oh, it's not, you don't
um,
have to credit me, because I don't know where I got it from, but it wasn't me. I didn't make it up.
I love it. I love that phrase. I can't remember who said it. It may have been that writer that everyone loves that I find a bit insipid. What's her name? Elizabeth Gilbert.
I,
Sorry.
Oh,
Sorry, I
yeah.
probably
I
lost
knew
our
you were
whole
going to
fan
say
base
that.
now.
Well,
No.
But
we're
I
not going to be
think
on
she once
Elizabeth
said,
Gilbert's podcast.
no, to be honest, I don't know if I could be friends with her anyway. But I think it was her who said mastery is boring.
Mm,
And I thought, oh, I think that's true. Like when there's no tension, juice, excitement, nothing to kind of spark you up where you think, whoa, there's a little bit of, I don't know what's going to happen here. Like
yeah.
when you get to the place where it's a bit dry and flat,
Yeah.
um, it is a bit dull. It's a bit kind of hollow.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I always, I put it this way, and I don't know. I say mastery without mystery is like bland as, like, it's like eating the blandest
Oh,
meal,
yeah.
right? Like, there's no
Mm.
seasoning.
Mastery without mystery. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. That's so
Like, you
much better
gotta
than what
have.
she said.
But yeah, it's like, I used to joke when I was teaching that there were some teachers who, so one of the things, and this is what Bridgette was alluding to before, about like letting yourself have a kind of a lab experimental kind of sense. And
Yeah.
so before you hit the high pay scale as a teacher, you start out and you're like, you get paid at level 1, and so 10 years before you get paid full pay. And that's sort of the trajectory I think of, is like 10 years to kind of be, at the level of a master teacher, you might say. Not that everybody who does that
Mm.
is a master teacher, but I used to joke about, how there'd be teachers who we'd say, they laminated their day books. In other words, they just taught the
Yeah.
same thing every year, the same
Yeah.
day, the same lesson, the same. And I thought, and I could never do that because it was just so dull. It's like, got to do something fresh. So yeah, like this is what makes it fun. Like right now for me, 18 years into coaching, this is really feeling fun. This
Yeah.
little series of chats we're having is really giving me a lot of joy and excitement around coaching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Same.
and I think one other piece with the experimentation, I mean, I love what you all are saying about it's like we want to choose the hill that we want to climb. And how do we want to do that? And that's where the creativity comes in. And so that's also experimentation. Oh, let me try this way. Let me try that way. I mean, when I was a new coach, I would be like, let me try one-on-one coaching, and kind of got the hang. Well, let me try groups, and let me try. And then I was constantly moving around trying to find the ideal mix, or like where I should niche into. And then I realized, well, I like the whole mix. So for me, I have to have all these different things going, or I get bored with any one of them. And how do I know that? Because I've tried every single one singly. And so this is all about finding out who you are. And I think if you can approach it with that spirit, and also it's so important to let go of the success failure mindset, right? So if you do one thing and you say, well, and let's be it's really the failure mindset, right? Usually, because we're not like, oh, I don't give myself a lot of successes, it's mostly a failure mindset. And it's like, oh, I tried that, it's a failure. And then again, you're not extracting any of the learning from it. And so when you're experimenting, this is about devoting yourself to this path. And part of that is learning and realizing that you're not a master, and that you really don't want to be a master, and that you're just trying things out and seeing how they work. And when you do that, you can get the information. I mean, you don't want to be a master in the sense that you've created something that's boring for yourself. I think you
Right.
want to approach mastery in the sense of what that means for you, which is also understanding who you are, how you want to work, and the conditions under which you thrive, and the kind of challenges that you like to sign up for.
All
right. So are we ready to put a bow on it? Any last words or thoughts? Leanne, I see you
Oh,
very thoughtful there.
there's lots of thoughts still, but we can save them for another. I mean, I'm just right now, I mean, maybe we have another conversation about what do we mean by mastery? And maybe we have a conversation about that, because that's what got me. That's what I was kind of, what are we talking about when we're talking about that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's
one to put a pin in.
Interesting. Yeah,
For
put a
sure.
pin in mastery.
Yeah.
Sass, final thoughts.
I just really want to reassure everybody that it's such a natural thing to feel that vulnerability. And, courage really does feel like ask. Like you only need courage when you're feeling vulnerable, right? So just kind of adopting that experimental mindset, I think, is absolutely the way to go. One thing I would really caution against is waiting until you feel ready. I know a lot of us will do that. Yeah. And what I have found is that the only thing that happens is that time passes. Like you actually, I think we need to be in relationship with the thing. And that will change the more you experiment and try things out. And because of that, you will shift and change, and your capacity to hold it will grow. And it means that your comfort zone expands. And so then the next thing can come, right? So waiting is it's very dissatisfying, and it can leave you feeling a bit stagnant. If anyone listening is there, it's like, that's a great invitation to just try something, right? Don't wait for a sign from the universe or everything to be aligned.
This is your sign. This is your sign.
Yeah, just embrace it and go. And I think do the smallest, most doable thing.
Yeah.
You know, don't go for the big finish straight away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Small acts of devotion. And think of courage. I always like to think of it as like, go back to the root of it and just ask yourself, like, is my heart in this?
Yeah.
Because it's not about like confidence and it's just like, is my heart in this?
Exactly.
If my heart is in it, go for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if your heart is fluttering, that's okay.
That's your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah, that means your
Yeah.
heart is in it, baby.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, well, that's why we're doing this, right? Because we want to feel things. So
Yeah.
Yeah. It's the
It's
feeling
the
of
feeling
being
of being
alive.
alive. Hello. Oh my
There you
goodness.
go. High five, you two.
Goosebumps.
All right. Well, I think we'll go out on that note. And just a quick reminder that if you all have questions or things that you would like us to discuss, topic ideas, you can email us at asktheogcoaches@gmail.com, and we'll put that in the show notes because we would love to hear from you. So thanks
Yeah.
everyone for listening in, and we'll see you and talk to you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Just cut that last one.
No, that was beautiful because we will see them.